Welcome, Mr. Jimmy Hay.
One piece of advice. Watch loads and loads and loads of films.
Yeah.
Like, Jimmy, it's Kelly Reichardt. We had cast somebody really famous.
Give it up for Katie Mack.
I was actually working in a nightclub.
What was it like being an editor on Pulp Fiction?
John Travolta. Yes. I can't come in tomorrow. I've got no clean pants.
Hello everyone and welcome to our first episode of Behind the Screens, the podcast where film lecturers share their industry stories.
In this episode, we'll be joined by our very own University of Bristol film and TV lecturers with intriguing careers that we can't wait to hear more about. Join us as we get the inside scoop on working in Hollywood, regrets and fears in the industry, backlash and film advice.
We're diving into the stories they don't teach in seminars. My name's Naya.
I'm Damira.
And I'm Chloe.
And this is Behind the Screen. Guest is living proof that watching too many films can actually be a career. Welcome, Mr. Jimmy Hay.
Welcome, Jimmy.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for doing this. Would you like to introduce yourself and what you teach here at the Uni of Bristol?
Absolutely. I'm Jimmy Hay. I teach film and TV studies and film and TV production at the University of Bristol. I am absolutely guilty of having watched way too many films and somehow managed to turn that into a career.
So on your career, do you want to just give us a brief rundown of your career in general and how you ended up teaching here at the Uni of Bristol?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So I did a degree in film studies, followed by an MA in film studies, and still terrified of getting an actual job and figuring out what I wanted to do with my life, I decided to do a PhD. And it was only halfway through my PhD I considered the kind of the idea of making films. I was very, very happy just kind of sitting on my own watching films and writing about them. But I converted my PhD into a PhD by practice it was about halfway through the second year. And the practice element of that became the film High Tide, which I co-wrote and directed, and that was released in 2015. That was the starting point. I'd only made one short film before we made High Tide, and it opened up a whole other kind of area of teaching. I knew I wanted to teach. I knew that had been a kind of a desire from quite an early age, but kind of very much teaching film production as well as film studies. So kind of I think because I didn't have any formal training of making films, my training was watching films and analysing them and writing about them. I kind of feel very strongly that having a kind of a more a critical appreciation of film is a really useful way of then being able to turn that into a kind of practice.
Yeah,
amazing.
definitely.
Would you say you have an inspirational figure in the film industry?
Well, an inspirational figure, actually I have met them once, very, very briefly, but the director Kelly Reichardt.
Wow.
Yeah, that was, it was Wendy and Lucy, which was her third film. That was the film that made me want to make films. I don't know, there was something about that film. I thought it was such a kind of a simple story. It's not narrative driven. It's and it made me think, actually, this might be something I want to do. And then several years later, I went to a screening of a film of hers at the BFI, and she was giving a Q&A afterwards. And I was loitering outside the toilets waiting for my wife when suddenly Kelly Reichardt was walking towards me.
You have a fangirl moment.
Oh my god, I'd love to say that I was really cool and really professional,
collected.
but bear in mind she was on her way to the toilet, so she had somewhere to be, but she clocked me from a mile out, and she must have rolled her eyes and thought, oh my god, because I fell into a puddle of like adoration, and it's like, oh my god, I wrote my PhD on you, oh my god, you're so amazing. And then just as I kind of calmed down and we were actually having a conversation, my wife then came out of the toilet, looked at me, looked at Kelly Reichardt, looked back at me and went, Jimmy, it's Kelly Reichardt.
Oh, that's so
Yeah, I know. Play it cool,
Not to
dude.
make it
Yeah.
too So obviously meeting Kelly was a highlight of your career. Have you faced any challenges in particular that stand out to you?
Yeah, probably the one that knocked me for six the most was when we were making High Tide. We had cast the film, and we had cast somebody really at the time. Well, not at the time. I mean, she's still very famous, but at the time she was really famous in a UK film and TV context. And I won't say who it was because the story doesn't end well. I think we must have presented a far more professional pitch than was actually the case, because we sent them the script. I had a conversation on the phone with her. We talked about the character. She was fully on board. And then she found out a few weeks later that we were raising part of the budget through crowdfunding. And I think her perception of what the production was and her perception of crowdfunding, which at that point was still very, very new as a way of generating income, was that it was kind of amateur hour. So 3 weeks before we were due to shoot, and we'd advertised the fact that they were going to be in the film, they pulled out, and we had to find another lead actor to be in the film. But there was a day where it was just like, well, this is all over. But even before it's begun, there's absolutely nothing I can do about this. The whole thing is doomed. We're going to have to give it back all the money, everything like that.
So, what is one piece of advice you would give someone wanting to start out in the film industry?
The one piece of advice. Well, this is going to sound like I'm just harking back to your intro, but I would say watch loads and loads and loads of films.
Yes.
The most helpful thing I found was that when I got onto set, and I guess shortly before that, when I was planning, when I was kind of turning the script into a shooting script and thinking about the shots that I wanted, think about the look that I wanted and the feel and the aesthetic, there was no confusion. I knew exactly how I wanted it to look, because I think I had seen so many films and I'd analysed so many films and I'd written about them and knew the kind of historical context or genre or tourist context. I had this kind of I developed, without realising it, over a number of years, a very clear idea of, if I were to make a film, how would I want it to look? And a lot of that is just piggybacking on other people's work, whether or not it's any good or anyone else likes it. But that was kind of beside the point, because it was at that point I wasn't really making the film with any sense of the fact that someone else might see it. It was it was a PhD film, and the fact that it did play in some cinemas and it did get out there was great. But it wasn't kind of really made with that intention at the start.
But that's amazing that it got shown in cinemas and stuff for you as well. Must have been so exciting.
It was I mean, seeing my film poster outside the cinema was still one of the coolest moments of my life. Yeah, that was really good. Yeah.
Well, just off the back of that, we understand that you've looked a lot at grief in cinema. That's sort of the main thing that you've been interested in. And of course, your first short film, Zero Sum, and that was sort of the first time that you were really addressing grief as a theme, and obviously your first debut, High Tide, which we've already mentioned. But do you want to go into a little bit about the process of creating these films, and maybe a little bit more on the inspiration and how you went about organising the filming process?
Specifically with these films about grief?
Yeah, looking more at grief now.
Yeah, okay. So, well, I guess the starting point for the project that I've been doing, this number of short films that have looked at grief, was I think for a lot of people that work in grief, was a very personal one. I lost somebody, and because my way of dealing with things is to go and watch some films and take myself off to a dark room. I did that, and then I started to realise that I was watching lots of films about grief, and a lot of the films I was watching I was finding quite unsatisfying. And not necessarily from a quality perspective. Some of the films were absolutely brilliant, and there was no kind of value judgment here, but I realised, I think I've always been interested in films that capture a sense of experience. So there is this kind of empathetic relationship that you have with the character or the characters that you're watching. And I found I was watching a lot of films about grief that were relegating that aspect in favour of plot twists or plot development, or they weren't really about grief. It was just using grief as a kind of an emotional shorthand or a like an inciting incident. This person has lost somebody, so we know where they're at in their life. They're really unhappy. So, and then that starts their kind of their narrative arc. So then I started looking at films more specifically about grief, and finding examples of films that I thought did it really well. So something like Three Colours Blue, or Jackie by Pablo Larraín, the Jackie Kennedy biopic, I think does it really well. Elements of Manchester by the Sea, although I also had some issues with that, with that film as well. And that got me interested in then making films that tried to capture that experience of what it is to grieve. But I don't think grief itself is almost like, I don't think that's the overriding interest. The interest is it possible to use film language and use those tools that you have as a filmmaker to be able to create a sense of experience. So that was the kind of the starting point for it. And then the 3 films I've made, and I hadn't even realised at the time I was making Zero Sum that it was really about grief, because I wasn't yet doing that project, and then it's only retrospectively. So I guess 4 films with that. They've each been trying different things, so they've almost been like little mini experiments in and of themselves. Again, because that sense of experience is more important than it being a kind of a narrative whole, as it were. So it's almost like the films as a standalone film, it didn't really matter whether it completely works.
Oh, wow. Before we wrap this up, we've got to ask, what is your favourite film? And it can be your own.
No, it can't. That would be the worst answer ever. If you interview anyone that gives their own film, just ask them to leave straight away. Easy, Before Sunset by Richard Linklater with Julie Delpy and Ethan Hawke. We screened the first one for Flashback Film Club last week, and I love it, but the second one, which I introduced last year for Flashback Film Club, is just my absolute standout.
Where are they in the second one? I can't remember.
Paris.
In Paris.
Before Sunset.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Jimmy.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Really
for
appreciate it.
No problem, thank you guys.
Thank you.
Brilliant.
Our second guest is someone who has her own department colleagues in awe of her success and love of cats. Let's give it up for Katie Mack.
Welcome, Katie. Thanks for doing this. Can you give us like a rundown of how you got into teaching at the Uni of Bristol?
So I was just one of those people that didn't really know what I wanted to do, and like a lot of people who don't know what they want to do, they end up doing degrees in English. Sorry if any of you were English students. But I looked around for lots of different courses and ended up doing a degree in cultural studies, which was really amazing because it looks at British culture, how it is now, how it started. So we sort of did a lot of history about the 17th century, 18th century popular culture, so we watched a lot of films, philosophy and literature. So it was a really, really broad degree, and I always say it taught me how to think. And during that degree there was a little bit of equipment. There's some video equipment, so there's a little gang of us that got together and started making films in our first year. And then we did a big documentary in our second year about the rockabilly culture in the 80s, and that was amazing. So when I finished, I knew I wanted to do something in film, and I hadn't done a gap year, so I was like, right, I want to go to the States. So I managed to get on this foreign student certificate program in film and television at UCLA, which gave me a visa to stay there as well. And again, whenever I kind of came into contact with producers in America, no offense to any producers in the UK, or camera or anyone, I was just recoiled at them. And then the editors would come in and talk to us and be, yes, those are my people. Those are kind of calmer and like more meticulous. So that's what I did, and I was very lucky to I was actually working in a nightclub over there at the time, taking the money on the door of this that was run by this British one. Yeah. Madonna came in.
Madonna.
So I was working in the nightclub and I met some women who were working film at that time.
Oh, amazing.
My friend was a camera assistant who I already knew, and she knew this sort of group of women that were in film and introduced me to one of them, Tanya. In fact, we went on a skiing trip. I had worked all night at the nightclub, slept for about 2 hours, bundled into a minibus, driven. The thing about Los Angeles is it's hot.
Yeah.
You only have to drive a couple of hours and you're skiing.
Wow.
So, and again, we were at this table with this woman. There were some producers, directors, and an editor. And again, they were all like, "Where are you from?" And I was kind of like, "Oh God, I've been working all night, and I'm not really very good at skiing, and I'm just tired, and I just want to drink my coffee, or whatever it was." And
Coffee.
And then again, the nice quiet one at the end of the table, who's become a very close, lifelong friend of mine, Tanya. And we just kind of connected. And then the next time she was working, she brought me on as an apprentice.
Incredible.
With Tanya, we then worked on a feature film called Denial in the UK with Robin Wright actually, and Jason Patrick. It was called Loon in the States, and that had been in post-production for a year when I came on and off. The director was quite a challenging person, but a genius as well. But I ended up working with every single person that I worked with on that film. I worked with again several times. So how did I come to teach? So I kind of got homesick really. And I got a bit sick of being foreign and feeling a bit different, and people not necessarily taking you that seriously because you weren't American. So I came home and I thought I wanted to be a therapist, to be honest.
Oh really? And here you are.
Because I'd had quite a lot of therapy while I was there, because everyone does in America, and that's what I thought I wanted to do. So I came back, and then it was like, oh, I need a job. And my brother said to me, well, look, you've got this kind of media-ish degree, and you've got all this experience. Why don't you teach? There were all these new courses, because they were quite new then. This is back in the 90s. So I thought, yeah, that's a good idea. So I applied to Bristol. Was a little bit shocked and horrified when I actually got the job. Because I'd had no training in teaching whatsoever, thrown straight in. And I was used to training apprentices where, you were sort of guiding people on what to do, but if they didn't do it right, it's like, go and redo it.
Yeah.
And so my first year I had a student who I'm very grateful to who pulled me aside and said, you have to be less harsh. You have to be more patient. And because I was just like, no, start again. Those lines don't line up. Like it's very regimented in editing, especially in film. We're working on film. Every number and everything matters so much that just being a little bit sloppy is not acceptable. And so I was very grateful to her for saying that to me, because it did make me go, hang on. I'm not training these students to work for me. I'm training them in what they need to know. So I kind of relaxed a lot of my regimen. I know I'm probably known as quite regimented.
Nothing wrong with that.
We
found it like that, horrifying.
We've got to ask, what was it like being an editor on the film Pulp Fiction? We need to know.
Okay, so
we need to hear.
It was amazing. It was a really incredible experience. Again, it was working with my friend Tanya. I had just come off another film, and she rang me and said, do you want to come and work on this Quentin Tarantino film? And I was like, oh, is that the guy that did Reservoir Dogs? Just like, yeah.
The guy.
I was going to say,
how sure he was, and this was only his second film, remember?
Wow.
So, and I was like, yeah, and then she was talking some more, and I said, oh, who's in it? Blah, blah. John Travolta, yes. Because I had been obsessed with John Travolta as a 13-year-old.
Oh, love it.
When Saturday Night Fever and Grease were out, I had a little picture of him that I carried in my pocket, It's really, that was like my pin-up.
What was he like?
Well, it was, so I came on purely because of that. And the thing is, Quentin was a huge John Travolta fan as well, and kind of resuscitated his career because it was going downhill at that point. What happened was, I came on towards the end of the film, like they'd finished most of, I think it was like a week of production still, and it was much later in the process where we were doing ADR, which is dialogue replacement. when the recordings weren't perfect. And I knew that John Travolta was coming in to the stage to do that. So I said to Tanya, look, you've got to send me over there on some spirit. So she actually, on the day it happened, she said, right, you're driving Quentin to the ADR stage.
Oh my gosh.
So that was really exciting. So we got in the car and we were just obsessed. Quentin and I were always talking about John Travolta, how great he was and how he should only ever play working class characters. Doesn't work when he's a bit posh. Blah, 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 you know, all these conversations. And we got in really bad traffic. And my car, I had a very old vintage Volvo from the 1960s, and it was overheating on the freeway. And I was like, oh my God. So we arrived a bit sweaty and a bit like, because I didn't have air conditioning in my car either. And we arrived and we pull into the parking lot, and there is John Travolta's dark blue Rolls Royce.
Wow.
And we walk in there and everyone's ready. But the most disappointing thing were his shoes.
Oh no.
He had these horrible, they're called topsiders, which are like yacht shoes. And they were
I know.
really colour. They had like, they kind of, people wear them on boats. They put like a string bit around them, and I was really into shoes, and I was just
Oh,
like,
no.
Thought no, not for you.
But so I forgot to say, on the way there, Quentin said, look, can we drop by my apartment first, because it's something I want to pick up. So I waited outside in the car, and he came out, because Quentin's a big comic book collector. He came out with this comic book, and he said, here, I want you to have this so John Travolta can sign it for you. And I was like, I can't take that out of your comic collection. He went, no, I really want you to have it.
Oh, lovely.
I
Do you
know,
still
it's
have it
very
now?
kind. Oh God, yeah.
Yeah, framed on the
I
wall.
should have- It's not quite framed. So we come in, we enter, and John Travolta's there, a bit like Jimmy's story about Kelly Reichardt. You know, John Travolta's hugging Quentin, and he says, John, there's someone I really want you to meet. This is Katie, she's a huge fan of yours. And he's like, oh great, another person.
Another one.
And she said, she's got the comic for you to sign. And so he's like, oh yeah, we better get started, but I'll sign it in a bit. So then, at the moment when it's time to sign, he said, I'll sign your comic then. So I decide to tell him this story while he's signing my comic, right? So I start telling him, I was a huge fan of yours, when I was 13. And I can't just stop the story, I've got to carry on to it. But he goes like, you're a fucking freak. Get away from me. No! He wrote on the comic to Katie, thanks for being such a big fan, love from John.
Oh,
at least you got that.
At least you
Yeah.
got
I have that.
Oh, how
amazing.
That's so brilliant.
I think we should talk a bit more about the fact you lived in LA
Okay.
and your experience there. So
Yeah.
if you had one of your current students now come and say, look, I want to do some experience, I want to go to LA, would you recommend it, or would you actually say, do you know what, I think you're better off here?
I would recommend
Yeah?
it. Yeah, I mean, it was a really amazing experience, and I always say this, like the first time I ever went there, when I came back on the plane, I cried because I knew I would never be happy in either place completely. And I still have that feeling when I go, although I think I'm in the right place now. But when I was there, so I would recommend it because there's so much filmmaking going on there. Just a trillion times more than there is here. So that means a lot more opportunities.
Yeah.
I mean, you're literally working 16-hour days. You don't know when you're going to get home. And that gets very tiring. I think I told a story the other day to the industrial placement students that I was working on this film where we're in the producer's house, and I said to her, look, I can't come in tomorrow, I've got no clean pants, I cannot work. And she went, bring your laundry in. And she did my laundry.
Oh
Wow.
Because they wanted us to keep working,
Yeah.
Crazy. Well, to wrap this up, what is your favourite
Oh
film?
my god, I knew
No
you were going to
pressure.
ask me that. It's so awful at this
One of
question.
them.
It changes all the time. See, I always want to say Saturday Night Fever because
Yeah, true.
I rewatched it recently and there's a gang rape in it, so it can't be my
that's
favourite
true.
film. I also really like a film called Big. Not Big, sorry, Big Night,
Okay.
which is
I think I've seen that.
Stanley Tucci, and it's all about this restaurant and this
Mm,
meal in
okay.
New York back in the 30s and
Amazing.
40s. Yeah.
Oh, perfect. Wow, thank you so much,
Yeah,
Katie.
thank you, Katie.
Sorry, I
Really
rambled.
appreciate it.
No.
No.
Like,
So we'd like to thank both Jimmy Hay and Katie Mack for sharing their experiences with us today.
And to our listeners, we hope you enjoyed as much as we did. Stay tuned for our next episode of Behind the Screens.
Don't forget to follow us on our Instagram account where you can find about the upcoming episodes. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next time on Behind the Screens.